Thank you for coming to this is our last regular seminar for this semester for the seminar series of NetC London. We still have one more seminar for this semester, which is going to be next Monday. So if you're interested, you're also going to have Igor Branchi, if I'm not wrong, but yes. But today we have the pleasure to have David March Pons. He's a PhD student in the Universitat Politécnica de Catalunya in Barcelona, under the supervision of Professor Carmen Miguel and Romualdo Pastor Satorras. He graduated with a bachelor degree in physics in 2020 at Universitat de Barcelona and has a master's degree in computational modeling in physics and chemistry at Universitat de Barcelona and Universitat Politécnica de Catalunya. Beyond his work on animal-inspired collective decision-making, his scientific interests lie in any kind of complex phenomena that emerges from social interactions of living organisms, from human opinion dynamics to epidemic spreading or urban systems. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, David. David, as you know, he's visiting also here in NetC, so it's nice for every one of us to get to know what research we do. So thank you, David, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to present the work that I've been doing during my PhD this last 3 years and a half. So like the main title of this work is the consensus formation in honeybee-like decision-making models. So collective decision-making is any kind of process that we observe in nature in which a group of individuals takes a collective decision towards one topic or one task that affects the whole of a group, from humans adopting social norms, from living organisms moving collectively towards some direction, or from other animals such as insects foraging collectively some resources, or moving collectively to a new place to build a nest. So they're interesting to study because it's the local interactions between these organisms what give rise to this collective emergent behavior. And especially I'm going to focus to the insect behavior, because they are simple units, they have simple interactions happening between themselves, but yet they display this complex self-organized behavior in the form of collective decisions, such as the case of nest site selection in honeybee swarms. Beyond studying how the interactions between these organisms shape the formation of a consensus or a collective decision, studying this process is also interesting in order to use them in robotic applications. In order to take out these interactions, this collective intelligence or this adaptability that social insects display, and use it to design autonomous robot systems that have to perform certain tasks on certain environments, such as investigating a certain area in order to find certain profitable resources, certain properties of interest that can be found on the land. And these are just some applications that are being designed taking from the collective intelligence of social insects and bringing them to the field of robotic swarms. So like the research questions that I began with when starting my PhD was, first of all, how do the interactions among the social insects, or the case of the honeybees, shape the formation of a consensus? And also, as I show you, how can we embody these interactions or these collective decision-making algorithms that we understand they have into a robotic swarm. So briefly outline of my presentation will be, first of all, introducing the model that I've been studying for the most of the time, how we moved from the model to implementing it in a swarm of robots, and then 2 other questions that arise from studying this model, which is the cross-inhibition signal and how also higher order interactions can shape the formation of a consensus. So first of all, the model. How do we go from the behavior of honeybees to an agent-based model? So honeybees, when they have to select a new nest, a new place where to build their nest, they go out in the environment, they explore certain areas or certain places where they can build a nest. They assess the quality of this nest because there are differences in the places where they can build, so they have to report this information back to the swarm. And finally, when they have this information, they come back to the swarm and they advertise it to the rest of the honeybees that have remained in the swarm. So this is a complex process that we can synthesize in a few parameters, such as the probability to discover the options that are present in the environment, the quality of these options that, as I will tell you next, will affect how they advertise these options. And finally, a group interdependence parameter that quantifies how much honeybees or agents of the model engage in either exploring or trusting social information. So first of all, that value sensitivity that controls what is known as the waggle dance. So honeybees, when they find an option, they assess its quality, and they come back to transmit this information. They do so by doing the waggle dance, which is a value-sensitive mechanism by which they spend more time advertising options that they value that have a higher quality for the nest, for where to build the nest. In terms of the nation-based model, what we do is fixing a certain number of time steps of the model in which bees spend advertising and trying to convince other honeybees to go and explore that option until they go back to the uncommitted state. This is how committed bees spend some time advertising and they become uncommitted. Then we have two other kinds of transitions, which is how uninformed bees or uncommitted bees start advertising an option, and they do so either by discovering these options, going out in the environment, finding options with a certain probability, or because they get recruited to that option by bees that are already performing that value-sensitive waggle dance. And they do so via this interdependence parameter that modulates how much they trust advertisements or how much they engage in exploring the environment. So anyways, this is how they compute their transition probability, how they will go from the uncommitted to the committed state. Okay. And basically, this is a simple schematic sum up of the agent-based model. We have uncommitted bees. With a certain probability, they become committed. They start advertising a certain option for a certain period of time until they run out of time and they go back to the uncommitted state. In this way, as time passes, they are able to build a positive feedback loop for the best possible option and finally reach a consensus. So before jumping to the results, this is the agent-based model. If we introduce a simple modification, which is forgetting about these fixed dense times and substituting them for a rate, which is inversely proportional to the quality of the option, so we generate Bernoulli trials at each time step of the model in which bees decide either to continue advertising it or to stop advertising. With a simple modification, we can go from the simple agent-based model to start writing some equations. First of all, writing a master equation, which tells us the probability to find the system in a certain state of the populations that are uncommitted or advertising any of the options. From this master equation, we can move to the mean field ordinary differential equations. And then, well, this is the equation at the lowest order of simplification that we can get. But we can start studying this equation, either integrating it numerically or studying the fixed points of the equations, etc. Anyways, what we ask of the model is whether the swarm or how is the swarm able to reach consensus. So we define an order parameter in a binary decision problem. Let me say that now we will be focusing most of the talk or all of the talk in a binary decision between two options that are different in quality. So we want to see when the swarm is able to select the highest quality option, which will be option 2. So if I say option 2, I'm meaning the high quality option. So we define an order parameter, which is this strong consensus, which is just a 2/3 majority in the final stationary state population that is advertising some option. When the system is able to reach a 2/3 majority or more, we say that the system is able to reach a consensus and to make a strong decision for the option. So basically, this is the formulation of the model, and we want to see how these features of the environment, let's say the quality of the options, the probability to discover them, affect the outcome of the decision, and which is the interplay between either exploring and engaging on pulling information from the environment or pulling information from your peers. So we begin by a simple scenario, which is an environment where options are equally likely to be discovered, they differ in quality, and we represent this consensus state space where in the x-axis we find the individual exploration, on the y-axis the social information. And what we see is that the higher is, or the easier it is to find options in the environment, the more the system needs to trust social information in order to discard the, let's say, socially unfiltered information that is present in the environment and filter it via trusting what their peers, their neighbors are already advertising. This is just one problem when options are more different or more close in quality. Of course, this consensus crossover line will change. So the closer the qualities are, the more interdependence, the more social trust or the more social information the system needs in order to reach a consensus decision. And finally, there is also an effect, an important quantity to take care of, which is the decision time. We see that the system is able, by maximizing the value of the interdependence, to make a strong decision, but also the time that it will take for the system to reach this decision is larger, the larger the trust is in social information and not in pooling the environment. So overall, the system should find a balance between these two behaviors in order to maximize consensus, but also balance the decision time. We can generalize a little bit more this problem by allowing the system, the options, to be differently discovered in the environment. So by varying this P parameter, this probability to find the options, so we find a more general consensus diagram in which now we vary the ratio between how likely it is to discover one of the options. And we find two clear regimes. If the good option is less likely to be discovered, the system needs higher levels of interdependence in order to reach the decision. Instead, if one option is easier to be found, the good option is easier to be found, and also relying in this value-sensitive mechanism by which the advertisement times are longer, the system can even reach consensus without or with little information, with little social information trust. In terms of the decision time, again, the decision is longer when it is more difficult. Here around the consensus crossover line. This is why this is the situation when the decision is the hardest, because the system rarely finds the option in the environment, the good option in the environment, because the probability to find it is small, but the level of social information is enough to sustain this option in the discussion, let's say, in the collective discussion. So when this happens, the decision takes a long time to make, but the system is still able to reach consensus. As before, if we vary now the distance in quality between the two options, of course, the consensus crossover line will move up or down in the consensus state space, meaning that the decision is easier or more difficult to take. And now also an important aspect is that the consensus crossover, when the system is able to make the decision, also depends on the overall magnitude of these discovery probabilities. So when the information is readily available in the environment, when these discovery probabilities are high, the system needs to balance that information that comes from the environment with a high level of interdependence. Instead, when the probabilities are small, which be those lines here, the system doesn't need to trust that much social information and is still able to build the consensus. Okay, so before jumping to the conclusions, let me just state an interesting feature of this kind of collective decision-making models, which is the relation with psychophysical laws. Psychophysical laws are some laws that relate the perception of a stimulus, a physical stimulus, to the magnitude of that stimulus. For instance, here I'm presenting the compliance to Weber's law, which relates the minimum stimulus difference that can be perceived by an organism with the overall magnitude of the organism. A simple example or a simple perception task is distinguishing between two sources of light for instance, by a human. What this sentence or that complicated sentence means is that the brighter the sources of light are, the more different in brightness they have to be in order for an organism to be able to distinguish them. So what does this have to do with collective decision? Well, once these collective decision-making models were posited, a lot of interest came in to see if they would behave or they would exhibit some kind of collective intelligence, meaning that whether a collective organism could display the same kind of or the same kind of performance in perception tasks as a normal brain, and it does so. Like in a collective decision, the perception task is just making an accurate decision. It's just choosing the best possible option out of the ones that they have in the environment, and this can be regarded as a perception task. Meaning now that instead of a physical stimulus, the stimulus is just the quality of the options, and the system has to make a decision, has to discriminate between these options. We find compliance with Weber's law by just increasing the overall magnitude of the qualities and seeing that when we increase the overall magnitude of the qualities, the difference on the qualities has to increase also in order to find the consensus crossover lines in the same place on the state space. Okay, so as conclusions from this part, we've seen that a strong communication and the value sensitivity in how the agents or the honeybees advertise the options is the key factor that allows the system to build consensus. In difficult situations, such as when qualities are, or when options are close in quality, or when the bad option is much more likely to be found than the good option, the system needs to balance this with a high value of the social communication, but this high value of the social communication leads to slower decisions. So the system, of course, is facing a speed accuracy trade-off, which is an important factor to consider when a system is making a collective decision. Okay, so I will come back to this point later, but as I said in the beginning, the second objective was to implement this collective decision-making algorithm in a robot swarm. And this is what we did. So, well, first let me present the robot that we used, which is the kilobot, which are simple robots that they move noisily. They have some vibrator motors that they use to move. They communicate via infrared signals. They can display the internal state using an LED. And we can program them, send them whichever program we want them to perform, and we can also simulate them using some libraries. So, okay, the objective is to see whether we can translate this collective decision-making model in a swarm of robots and go beyond what we could do with just computer simulations of this model. What we do is taking this collective decision-making model, put the robots in a certain circular arena where we allow them to interact. We make them perform a persistent random walk in which they are exchanging information, and we define the time step of the model by certain time interaction windows by which agents, if they are uncommitted, they sense the information that is being sent to them, so they compute the population fractions that they see in the local environment, and with this they compute their own transition probabilities. If they are advertising, they will just, at each time step, perform this Bernoulli trial by which they will decide if they are stop advertising their option or not. Anyways, in the meantime that they are performing this random walk, they are building a certain communication network that we will use to study or to relate this communication network to the outcome of the decision process. Okay, well, just for you to see, this is how the experiments with the robots look. We had to run them in darkness in order to keep track of the lights, so we can keep track of the state of the system. And we developed software in order to track the lights of each robot and assess in which state they are. And with this, we started performing experiments of the model that we compared to the simulations. And we saw that, okay, we had an arena with a circular arena with 35 robots. We let them interact for 8 seconds before triggering a change of state. And we saw that, as you can see here in the green triangles, the results of the simulations aligned pretty well with the mean field results, which is this orange line. So we said, okay, what's happening? Because also let me say you that this purple line is the quenched results, which is a fixed communication network in which the robots are not moving around. So seeing that the the experiments align pretty well, we went to the communication network that they are building in a time step, and we started studying the properties of this network of communication. For this reason, we wanted to study the percolation transition of this network when the system is able to form a giant component, a completely connected, uh, system. And for this, we used the mean cluster size in order to identify the percolation transition. Mean cluster size is just this ratio here in which we sum over the little clusters, which are not the giant component. And this allows us to identify a peak where the percolation transition is happening. The percolation transition can happen in different ways. For instance, if we have the robots moving around, we can allow them to interact for more, for longer, or for shorter, and this will change the radius of interaction in which they achieve the percolated network. The same happens if we leave them fixed, and we just vary the density of robots that we are putting in the arena with the same interaction radius. Anyways, we identify the percolation transition. We also made sure when we had the percolation transition identified that it complied with the well-known two-dimensional percolation exponents at the percolation transition with the Poor-Law distribution of cluster sizes. And having identified this percolation transition, we define this coverage parameter, which is just an adimensional parameter that relates the density of robots in the arena and their interaction radius. And then we went back to running some experiments at different densities, at different also simulations, at different radius of interactions, at different densities in the arena. And by contrasting them above the percolation transition or below the percolation transition, we could see how the system approached the mean field values, which are these lines here. Just for you to know, the simulations that we were running and that I showed you in the previous slide were these points here, but where they were well beyond the percolation transition. But you can see as we decrease the density of robots in the arena, how the performance of the model is worse up to that we reach the percolation transition. So anyways, as a conclusion, studying the percolation or the percolation of the network allows us to identify for a certain situation the appropriate interaction radius that we want our robots to have, or the appropriate density in the interaction area that we want for robots, or the appropriate interaction time window that we need. Also, another factor that is key in order for the system to sustain these mean field results in a topology that is not a complete connected graph is that independent exploration that allows different topologies, such as completely like a giant component but not a completely connected network, or also experiments or simulations in a lattice topology that I have not shown here. But all these collective decisions in different topologies that are not a mean field topology behave as a mean field or a mean field results, also because of this independent constant exploration of information. Okay, so this is how we concluded the experiments, and then we moved on some other questions that arised from studying the collective decision-making model. So coming back to the conclusions of the model, we were talking about when the decision is more difficult. And this is when the options are equal on quality or almost equal. In these situations, the system is not able to break the symmetry, and based on these signaling patterns that I described, the system would settle into a deadlock. Then there are some strategies that we can find. As I said, we can maximize the level of social information that the system pulls, but this is an ill-posed limit because in this way, the system is not pulling information from the environment. Anyways, as a quick view, when we do this, the system then behaves in a different way. It shows the phase transition, which is relates to the contact process and more or less behaves like an SIS model, for those that know, with a certain critical exponent and a certain transition from a, let's say, null or inactive phase to an active phase. But anyways, this is like a theoretical limit, and in order to reach it, we should design some adaptive mechanisms by which the system when it senses that the consensus is strong enough, it should cease exploration and just trust social information in some way. For instance, by sensing the quorum that they have in their surroundings, and if the quorum is strong enough, start pulling information, stop pulling information from the environment. We have some collaborations going on this topic, but the main mechanism that nature developed for this kind of situations is what is known as cross-inhibition. Inhibitory signals are just a mechanism by which some system is a signaling mechanism by which some system discourages or disincentivates some kind of other signal. As you may know, for instance, in neuronal activity, the competition between inhibitory and excitatory signals. In honeybees, inhibitory signals are observed, for instance, when they are foraging some resource, and some honeybees sense that this resource is not profitable anymore, so they send inhibitory signals to stop foraging this flower patch and go, for instance, to a different one. In the collective decision-making process, it took a little bit more in order to figure out what was happening with these cross-inhibition signals, because the word cross is important. Cross-inhibition signals in this task are delivered between honeybees that have different information. This means that they are advertising options that are different. And honeybees that sense that somebody is advertising an option that is different to theirs will send a stop signal or a cross-inhibition signal to that honeybee. So this is confirmed, this was experimentally observed, and since then many models of collective decision-making inspired in the behavior of honeybees have featured this cross-inhibition signal. So this is a quick summary of the model we had since before, with the commitment transitions and the abandonment or advertising transition. And also we can now feature the cross-inhibition signal as an interaction between the populations that are committed to the different options. This is how the mean field equation gets modified, introducing the cross-inhibition signal that, let me say, is modeled as a linear function of the advertising populations towards the population that is being inhibited. And this cross-inhibition is relevant, first of all, because it allows the system to make a more cohesive decision. This means that in the stationary state, if you introduce cross-inhibition signaling, the imbalance between the two populations that you create is higher because you are sending stop signals to the population that is losing. Even more important is, as I said, is relevant in order to break deadlocks when the task is between two qualities that are close, two options that are close in quality. Without cross-inhibition, the system would go to a deadlock. Introducing cross-inhibition, the system is able, by an imbalance in the two populations levels, to choose one option and discard the other. The downside of this is that sometimes the system may make the wrong decision because the imbalance is created towards the population that is holding an opinion for the lower quality option, but since the difference in populations becomes large enough, the cross-inhibition signaling kicks in and the bad option ends up being chosen. So the system will have to balance then also a cohesion or accuracy trade-off when introducing the cross-inhibition signal. Anyway, as the title of the section said, we are now studying the nonlinear cross-inhibition signal. This is because, reading some papers about this cross-inhibition signal, it was hinted that this was working as a kind of a complex contagion process by which some stop signals had to be accumulated for honeybees that were advertising an option before they stopped advertising that option. So this works, as I said, kind of a complex contagion by which you need a few signals to be accumulated before you trigger the change of behavior. So in order to model this kind of complex contagion or nonlinear cross-inhibition, we introduced these sigmoid functions, which the main objective or the main point is to reduce the strength that small populations exert. And we do so by reducing the cross-inhibition strength that small population fractions exert onto their adversary population fractions. We do it by introducing these sigmoid or these linearly bounded sigmoid functions. And then in order to assess the outcome of the decision process, we look at three quantities of interest. First of all, the consensus, which is basically, now we are looking just at the population fraction that is committed to the winning option at the end of the decision process. We also look at the probability to choose the best option out of the two that the system is deciding in between. And we also look at the decision time. And what we see with the nonlinear cross inhibition is that first the system is maximizing or is enhancing the consensus or the cohesion of the group because they are making a stronger decision. Because by introducing the nonlinear cross inhibition, we are exaggerating or we are increasing this imbalance in cross inhibition strengths that the two populations are sending to each other, allowing the system to maximize the population that is committed to the winning option and minimize the population that is committed to the losing option. Similarly, since we are reducing the strength of the cross inhibition when the population fractions are small, we are allowing the system to evolve without cross inhibition signaling in the initial stages of the decision process, and this allows the system to make a quicker decision. The downside of this, as you may imagine, is that we are decreasing the probability to make the absolute best option. So there are some benefits. The downside of this is that, yes, the system will evolve toward one of the options. When cross inhibition kicks in, this option will be selected, but it may be more likely than with the linear cross inhibition, the bad option. Anyways, in order to test in more general situations this nonlinear cross inhibition signaling, we defined this model performance, which is the consensus multiplied by the probability to choose the option divided by the decision time, and we compare the performance ratio between the nonlinear and the linear models. First, we tested in a situation in which we allow to vary the quality between the two options. And we see that nonlinear cross inhibition is more relevant, of course, when the qualities are very close, when the options are very close in quality. In this situation, the system is balancing this speed value trade-off in which it has either to choose or to make a fast decision towards one of the options that may be beneficial for the group, or make a very strong decision for the best absolute possible option. We see that by introducing this nonlinear cross inhibition signaling pattern, the system is maximizing the speed value, is maximizing the speed part of this speed value trade-off. Another interesting scenario is when we allow to vary the availability of the options in the environment. So we allow to vary this probability to discover the options, making them more easy to find if this parameter is high. And in this scenario, what's happening is that the system, when honeybees go out and explore, they may more easily come back with socially unfiltered information, as I was saying in the beginning. In this scenario, what we want is another mechanism that allows the system to still make a strong decision and not trust that socially unfiltered information. And nonlinear cross inhibition allows to act as a noise filtering mechanism by which, even though some honeybee or some agent of the model goes out and comes back with the wrong information, because comes back with the information about the option that was already losing the discussion, weakening the cross inhibition that then they will exert into the rest of the population, we are able to maintain a high level of cohesion in the stationary state that the system is achieving. Okay, so as a wrap up of this part, we've seen that the nonlinear cross inhibition signaling pattern improves consensus, improves decision time at the cost of decreasing the probability to choose the best option. And it may be useful when we are designing an artificial system if we want to maximize the speed part of a speed value trade-off. So we want, for instance, if we have a robotic system and we just wanted to make a quick decision for one of the options that are present in the environment, and we do not want to delay selecting just one of the options. Also, as I said, it acts as a noise filtering when information is readily available and we do not want to delay the decision process. Nonlinear cross inhibition works also in this sense. And finally, I introduced different nonlinear cross inhibition functions, sigmoid functions, linearly bounded sigmoids. But just the important part or the important takeaway of this is that it doesn't matter that much the shape of the function, just weakening the strength of the weakening the strength that small populations exert is what is relevant in order to achieve this effect in a collective decision-making process. Okay, so as a final part, we then we came back also to the question that I asked in the previous section, how can a system make an effective decision between two options that are equal in quality, but without featuring cross-inhibition? So we wondered whether if we introduce higher order interactions on top of the usual interactions, the system is able to make a decision. So well, as you may know, higher order interactions are just interactions that happen in a social system in groups of different sizes. So information is not transmitted via pairwise interactions, but groups interactions in which all the agents of the group form part of a discussion in the same moment, and they can be encoded in hypergraphs, in simplicial complexes, for instance. And what we do here is, as I said, come back to the problem of symmetry breaking. We know that if options are equal in quality, the system will reach a deadlock. We know that since now what we've been is modeling pairwise interactions in which basically this is the mean field approximation, but what happens is that an uncommon will be just samples out of the populations in their surrounding of a certain probability, one option or the other. And this does not allow to break the symmetry, but we say, okay, what if apart from pairwise interactions, we put some kind of higher order interactions in the collective decision-making process? Of course, here we are moving a little bit away from the honeybee problem, and we are like designing a collective decision-making algorithm in a more general way. But still, we found that question like interesting to see if we could answer it. So now we modify the model. We introduce in the commitment transitions recruitment that happens as before as pairwise interactions, but also when agents form part of an interaction group, and then the recruitment happens at a different rate or at a different strength. We keep the same abandonment transitions after an advertisement that is proportional to the quality of the options. And also this is spontaneous adoption, this is spontaneous pooling of information of the environment. We can, again, write some mean field equations, cut the approximation to just pairwise and triangle interactions and not go to a more higher order. We can make a change of variable that will be useful for us to analyze the system, which we move from populations to the sum of populations, which is the active population, and this magnetization or consensus parameter that allows us to see if it's different from zero, if the system has broken the symmetry. But anyways, let me quickly go through the solutions. When we have no spontaneous adoption, so the system does not pull information from the environment, what we find is an already known result, which is that result from the simplicial models of social contagion. Basically, what will happen is one option will vanish, and depending on the strength of the social interaction, the system will be able to sustain the contagion of one of the opinions present in the discussion, or will not, and it will settle in a completely inactive state. The phase diagram, some of us may already know it. We basically have a continuous transition if the two-body interaction strength is not high enough, at a critical point in which the system changes the nature of the transition and goes through a discontinuous transition with a p-stability region, and then through the symmetry breaking. Okay, but what was interesting for us is answering this question when the system is pulling information from the environment, when we have a certain value from this p parameter that is different from zero. When we do so, I don't go through the equations, but we have, again, two solutions: the deadlock solution, in which the system settles in a stalemate between the two options, or when the system is able to select one of the options. So the two options are still present in the discussion, but the system breaks the symmetry and makes an imbalance towards one of the two options. This changes a little bit the picture of the state space, because now that continuous transition that was found at, let's say, the value one of this pairwise recruitment parameter is displaced towards this red line. But anyways, we still find a continuous transition at a critical point, a p-stability region that is shrunken, and a discontinuous transition through this p-stability region that allows the system to reach the symmetry breaking or the proper decision state. This was the mean field approximation. We tried this collective decision-making model in random simplicial complexes with different topologies, and we saw that still, when we have some pooling of information on each node of the network, the system matches pretty close the mean field results. And as a wrap up of this section, well, we've seen that indeed the system is able to break the symmetry when we add pairwise communication. Sorry, when we add three-body communication on top of pairwise communication. This independent sourcing of information from the environment acts as a noise hampering consensus because it displays the transition towards asymptotically larger values of the three-body recruitment strength. But it also acts as a decision facilitator if the values of the recruitment strength are high enough by shrinking the B-stability region where the system can still fall back into the deadlock phase. Finally, this has been a mean field analysis of this collective decision-making process, but further steps in this regard are analyzing the interplay between the three-body recruitment interactions and the decision time, and also studying how realistic topologies that we can get from our kilobot experiments data, how we can define simplicial complexes on top of those networks that we were studying before, and also how could we engineer the robots of the system to interact in featuring also higher order interactions. So that has been all. I had these acknowledgement slides to thank my advisors, Carmen and Romualdo, and collaborators, Julia Mojica, who did most of the hard work with the kilobots, and Ezequiel, who was a postdoc researcher in Barcelona for a while. And that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, David, for the talk. We have time for some questions. People have questions in the room or online. I can start with a question. So if I understood right at the end, you said that like the cross inhibition, basically sometimes it can get the system to go to the wrong option. No?
Yes.
So like my question would be, okay, like this might happen in nature, but if we are thinking of like kind of like adapting this to robot, for example, so then why would you use the cross inhibition? Like it is because like just in the cases where like the two options are like very close to values that the cross inhibition is worth it, or do you think it's not worth it, or I don't know?
Yes.
Like what's the kind of like? Because at the end I would say why don't you just use like kind of like a more brutal, no, like more like just direct algorithm and you will guarantee that you reach the right option.
Yes, this is what would our algorithm without cross inhibition would do. Because here we are sampling from the environment, we are assessing the qualities of the options, and the system making these value sensitive advertisement periods is able to build let's say a decision in which there is always a higher population committed to the winning option. But still, if the options are close in quality, you may find that the populations are close to each other. So maybe it's like a 50%, 40%, and a 10% of uninformed. So the thing is, if you want the system to make a 90%, like to have a 90% of population committed in the final decision, because you want your swarm to make a proper decision, you need to implement some kind of signal. Some signal that is easy to implement is this cross inhibition. Of course, there you may lose the accuracy because you may end up choosing the wrong option. And with the non-linear cross inhibition, you are exacerbating this effect because it is even more likely that you choose the wrong option. But then it depends of the task that you are endowing your system to do. If you want just to select one option, then that's fine. If you do not want to select that option, you may have to think of other. For instance, that time adaptive mechanism in which when you have built a consensus towards the option, you start changing your interaction rates so you can adapt to the decision.
Regarding the kilobot experiment, slide 18, if you could just pull it up.
18.
1.8, yeah. So the advertiser's commitment states, so what is it exactly that they're advertising? Is it just the position that they're in, or just
no, well,
are they trying to minimize or maximize?
No, they are advertising their option. So like
option of what?
they are committed, they have to make a decision between option 1 or option 2. So what they are saying is, I am committed to option 1. They hold this advertisement for a certain period of time, by which the red robots that are uninformed, they will sample from the environment, but the more time you spend shouting that you are committed to option 1, the more likely is that an informed individual comes and finds you advertising this option. So this is like a very simple collective decision-making task in which they are not going out and coming back. We just have them there. But they are saying, okay, I have discovered this option. I try to recruit you to also go and start advertising this option.
So sorry, so I get that part. Just in terms of what is it in the physical arena? Are they trying to like what's the reward in this experiment?
Well, the reward is
Oh,
no, they have to decide between one of the options. So
okay. It's just the state that they're in.
yes,
That's what
exactly.
they're
Yes,
trying
yes,
to-
yes, yes.
Okay.
Exactly. So they want to hopefully to propagate their state to the rest of the swarm,
Right.
but they can only do it by signaling that they are committed to a state.
Right.
Outside of the space of the arena, there is no constraint of space with the decisions. So the decisions are just like the states and they just propagate
Yes.
that information.
Yes, yes, yes. There are other experiments with more sophisticated labs that robots go out to an option, they physically move out of the interaction space. This like the option may be farther away or closer away, depending on how you tune your experiment. And this makes a little bit the thing more complicated, but also yes, because one option may be closer, so you spend less time going back and forth. But yeah, in this case, we took a simple approach in which the robots do not leave the arena. So they simulate that they have went out, explored, and came back with the information.
Any other questions?
Yeah, curiosity about the cross simulation, like how do you know how it actually happens in nature?
Yes. So cross inhibition is like, as I showed you in the initial slides, there are the honeybees that are moving and they are advertising an option via this waggle dance. When another honeybee sees it and wants to cross inhibit, they will physically like step over that honeybee and like head bump it. Like, yeah, there is a picture which shows the honeybee and all the angles from which they receive cross inhibition or stop signals. And yeah, they more or less receive like isotropically. When a honeybee decides cross inhibition, it goes and it headbutts it. And
You just basically want to stop the propagation of that signal, like that waggle dance.
yes, yes, yes.
Basically
Yeah,
stop
yeah,
it.
exactly.
Just
Yes, yes.
stop.
And another question, sorry, like maybe you mentioned this, but I missed it. Does it happen like between all of the committed bees, or there are some who can cross inhibit others and some who can't?
Well, generally it can happen between all the committed bees. So any bee that is committed to an option may eventually send a stop signal to a bee that is committed to a different option. Yes. So when they are committed, they are advertising, but they are also inhibiting others. Yes.
And maybe this is too much, but like, isn't known how they choose to, like, let's say that they see other, like, two other commit bees with different, like,
This I don't know.
levels.
If they are no, because I have to think, because usually the experiments that they make on field are between two options, and they just keep track of the honeybees. They paint them with, when they see them going away, they paint them, and when they come back to the swarm, they say, okay, this is advertising this option, this is advertising the other option.
Okay.
When there are three options, I don't know how they do it. Probably the one that they see closer.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
So maybe it's a bit like similar to what you said, but can you generalize this to like more than two options if those options are like ranked as well? Like
Yes, yes, exactly. We did. I left it out of the presentation, but you can have a more than two options, of course. Like the model works with any number of options. The thing is, if you introduce more options, of course, the quality of the options is important for the system to build the consensus for one of the options. The thing is, if we have a lot of options, the system will sample or we have a lot of populations committed to the options that are present in the environment. And then you also need a mechanism in order to choose one of the options. So you also need to make this time adaptive mechanisms by which you maximize the social interaction as the decision advances, or you also introduce cross inhibition by which the winning population inhibits the rest of the options. But yeah, you can generalize this model to multiple.
And in the case of multiple options, do you have just one best and everything else is bad, or are they like ranked? So you have the best, second best.
You can invent the problem that you prefer. But usually, like you can the most interesting problem for me is when the options are close in quality, and when they are close in quality, they just have to. This was a binary decision problem, but they have to make a decision out of 5 options. And how do they do it? It's like the inner working would be similar. But yes.
Any other question? Maybe one.
Online.
Online.
Oh, sorry, I removed it.
No.
There's no? Okay. Okay, so then I think, well, I can ask for one last question.
Well, I think I have a slide with multiple options for you to see.
Yeah.
So this is just a simulation with 5 options with linear cross inhibition. Can I make a full screen?
Yeah, go with the top. Yeah.
No. Oh, bottom. Oh.
No.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so for instance, with linear cross inhibition, since there are a lot of options, a lot of populations are sending cross inhibition between each other. At the moment that you introduce this nonlinear cross inhibition, since the populations are not high enough in order to send cross inhibition signals to each other, only the one that fluctuates a little bit out of the stalemate state where they are is allowed to make to exert cross inhibition into the others, and the system then makes a decision.
Okay, maybe just one last question, just because in the part of the higher order approach, you choose to use simplicial complexes because you are basing these group interactions on the networks that you already had, or the temporal networks.
No. We are generating random simplicial complexes.
And why did you choose like simplicial complex over like higher order, like hypergraph, like representation?
Well, because it made sense that if a group interaction is happening, like for instance, in the kilobot problem, if we have kilobots that are seeing each other part of a group, they will also see each other as individual pairs. Because maybe the signal of the group interaction may be lost, but then still the pairwise signal may not be lost. So I think it's natural, at least in this setting, that interactions are built on top of each other.
Okay. There's one last question, no? If not, thank you, David, again for the seminar. Thank you for coming.